He thought it was just a small act of kindness, fixing a little girl's most precious treasure. But in less than 24 hours, that kindness would pull him into a storm he never saw coming. A will that could change his life forever. A secret locked inside the doll. And a powerful enemy determined to take it all away. To keep the promise hidden in her final gift, he'll have to mend more than just broken toys. Will one small act of love be enough to unite a divided town before it's too late? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of Willowbend Thrift Fix, creating a soothing rhythm that matched the tick-tock of the old wall clock. Evan Cole wiped his hands on his worn work apron, surveying the cluttered but organized shelves of his small shop. 20 years of fixing everything from toasters to toy trains had taught him there was always something that needed mending. The brass bell above the door jingled, and a gust of damp air swept in, along with a small figure. It was a little girl, no more than 8, her yellow raincoat dripping onto the welcome mat. Her dark eyes were red and puffy, and she clutched something wrapped in a faded floral cloth against her chest. "Can I help you?" Evan asked softly, noting how the child's lower lip trembled. She nodded, carefully unwrapping the bundle to reveal a porcelain doll. The doll's Victorian-style dress was immaculate, but its torso had a clean break across the middle. "This is Lullaby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was my Grandma Ruth's." Evan came around the counter, kneeling to get a better look. "I'm Maya Brooks," the girl continued, gently touching the doll's painted face. "Grandma Ruth passed away last month, and Lullaby is all I have left of her. Mama says she used to sing me to sleep with this doll when I was a baby." "I'm very sorry about your grandmother," Evan said, carefully taking the doll when Maya held it out. He examined the break with practiced eyes, noting the clean line of the fracture. "Would you like me to take a look at fixing her?" Maya nodded eagerly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "Can you? Really?" "The break is clean," Evan explained, pointing to the edges. "See here? When porcelain breaks this way, it's actually easier to repair than if it was shattered. I have some special adhesive that works well with this type of material." The hope in Maya's eyes reminded him of his own daughter years ago, before everything changed. "How much will it cost?" she asked, reaching into her raincoat pocket and pulling out a small change purse decorated with unicorn. Evan watched as she began counting out quarters and dimes with careful determination. The sight squeezed something in his chest, the same feeling he got whenever he thought about his late wife Ruth and the way she'd always helped others, never expecting anything in return. "Tell you what," he said, "this one's on the house." Maya's eyes widened. "Really? But Mama says we should always pay our way." "Your Mama's right about that." Evan nodded, standing up with Lullaby cradled carefully in his hands. But sometimes, when something means this much to someone, fixing it is its own reward. He placed the doll gently on his workbench, next to a reading lamp with an adjustable arm. "Grandma Ruth used to say something about fixing things," Maya said, following him to the bench. Her small fingers traced the edge of the wooden surface. "She said when something breaks, you mend it twice." "Twice?" Evan asked, intrigued. Maya nodded solemnly. "Once with glue, once with love. She said the love part was more important because that's what makes the fixing stick." Evan felt a smile tugging at his lips. "Your Grandma Ruth sounds like she was a wise woman." "The wisest," Maya agreed. "When will Lullaby be ready?" "Well, this type of repair needs time to set properly," Evan explained, already mentally calculating the steps needed. "I'll work on her after hours tonight, and she should be ready tomorrow morning. Can you come back then?" Maya's face lit up. "First thing? Before school?" "First thing," Evan promised. "I'll make sure she's ready." After explaining to Maya exactly how he would fix the doll and watching her reluctantly leave the shop, Evan returned to his regular work. Throughout the day, between fixing a customer's antique radio and replacing the zipper in another's jacket, his eyes kept drifting to the broken doll on his workbench. When the last customer left and the evening shadows began creeping across the shop floor, Evan flipped the open sign to closed and pulled up his work stool to the bench. Under the bright lamp, he carefully cleaned both broken edges of the porcelain, making sure no dust would interfere with the bond. As he worked, he found himself humming Amazing Grace, a hymn his wife had loved to sing in church. The familiar melody filled the quiet shop as he applied the special adhesive with precise movements, holding the pieces together with gentle pressure. The rain had softened to a whisper outside, and the shop's old radiator clicked and sighed, providing a cozy backdrop to his work. Evan positioned the doll in a custom-made stand to hold it steady while the adhesive set, adjusting it just so, making sure the seam would be perfect when it dried. He didn't know then, couldn't have known, that this simple act of kindness would set in motion events that would change not only his life, but the entire fabric of Willowbend itself. For now, he was simply a man doing what he did best, fixing something broken with careful hands and a caring heart. The morning sun cast long shadows through the shop windows as Evan swept the worn wooden floor, his broom making soft swooshing sounds against the planks. The familiar scent of furniture, polish, and old books filled the air, mingling with the lingering dampness from yesterday's rain. He paused to adjust a copper table lamp on display, making sure its restored shade sat perfectly straight. The bell above the door chimed. Evan looked up to see Maya from yesterday. Her bright smile, a stark contrast to her tears from the night before. She held Lullaby carefully in her arms, the morning light catching the subtle gleam where he'd repaired the crack. Behind her stood a tall woman in hospital, Scrubs probably her mother. Evan guessed at Anne, two people in business attire who seemed oddly out of place among the shop's collected treasures. "Mr. Cole," Maya bounced on her toes. "Look how pretty she is now. You fixed her just like Grandma Ruth would have wanted." The woman in scrubs placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "I'm Lena Brooks, Maya's mother." Her expression was a careful mix of warmth and wariness. "And these are Miss Clara Wynn and Mr. Patterson from Wynn Associates." The female lawyer stepped forward. Her silver-streaked hair swept back in a neat bun. Despite her formal attire, there was something approachable about her presence, like a favorite aunt at a family gathering. "Mr. Cole, we need to discuss something important with you. Perhaps we could sit down?" Evan gestured toward the small sitting area where he usually showed customers how their repaired items worked. They settled into the mismatched but comfortable chair-saw pieces he'd restored himself. "Mr. Cole," Clara began, opening her leather portfolio, "I'm here about Ruth Brooks's will. She passed away 2 weeks ago." "I'm so sorry," Evan said automatically, glancing at Lena and Maya. He'd heard mentions of Ruth Brooks over the years, a respected figure in the black community, known for her wisdom and generosity, but had never met her personally. "Thank you," Lena replied softly, pulling Maya closer to her side. Clara continued, "Mrs. Brooks left very specific instructions in her will, which was sealed until now." She withdrew a document and adjusted her reading glasses. "She has named you, Evan Cole, as the steward of her historic home on Oak Street and the executor of a legacy fund dedicated to creating a community arts and repair center." The broom Evan had been holding clattered to the floor. "I'm sorry, what?" "Grandma picked you!" Maya exclaimed, hugging Lullaby tighter. Mr. Patterson, who had remained quiet until now, spoke up. "The fund contains sufficient resources to cover the first year's operating expenses, including necessary renovations and program costs." Evan's mind reeled. "But I never even met Mrs. Brooks. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Clara said kindly. "Ruth was very deliberate in her choices. She learned about you from Margaret Wilson at First Baptist. You fixed her grandfather's clock last year and refused payment because she was on a fixed income." "Margaret? But that was just..." Evan's voice trailed off. "Just kindness?" Clara's eyes crinkled with understanding. "That's exactly why Ruth chose you. She spent her final months arranging this, waiting for the right person to reveal themselves through their actions." Lena shifted in her chair. "Mama believed in signs. When she heard about you from Margaret, she started asking around. People kept saying the same things about how you help folks who can't afford repairs, how you teach kids to fix their own bikes." "The will specifically mentions the mender with gentle hands," Clara added, consulting her papers. Ruth was quite poetic in her reasoning. Maya piped up. "Grandma always said you can tell everything about a person by how they handle broken things." Evan ran a hand through his gray-flecked hair, trying to process it all. The responsibility felt enormous. "I don't know the first thing about running a community center." "That's why I'm here," Clara said warmly. "I'll guide you through the legal aspects, and there's a community advisory board already outlined in the will." "We'll help too," Lena added, though Evan noticed she was studying him carefully. "Mama's house has been a gathering place for decades. People know what it means to the neighborhood." The lawyers spent the next half hour explaining the basic terms and timelines. Evan listened, nodding mechanically, his eyes occasionally drifting to the doll in Maya's lap, such a small repair that had somehow led to this moment. After Claire and Mr. Patterson gathered their things to leave, promising to return tomorrow with more detailed paperwork, Evan found himself alone behind his counter. He stared at the spot where Maya had first placed the broken doll, wondering what Ruth Brooks had seen in him through other people's stories. The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows now, as if the whole world had tilted slightly on its axis. The doll sat on the counter where Maya had carefully placed it before leaving, its crack barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Evan touched it gently, remembering the careful work of putting it back together, never imagining that simple act of repair would repair something much larger than a broken toy. The afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows of Willowbend Thrift, Fix, casting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. Evan stood behind the counter, still trying to process the morning's unexpected news. His eyes kept drifting to Lullaby, the porcelain doll he'd repaired the night before, now perched on a nearby shelf among other restored treasures. Something about the doll caught his attention. He reached for it, noticing how the weight felt slightly off balance in his hands. When he turned it over carefully, a soft rattling sound came from inside the torso where he'd made the repair. "That's strange," he muttered, running his fingers along the seam. He hadn't noticed anything loose during the repair. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara Wynne stepped back into the shop, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She'd left earlier but mentioned she might return with some preliminary paperwork about Ruth's will. "Mr. Cole, I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice warm and measured. "Actually, you might want to see this," Evan replied, still examining the doll. "Something's inside it." Clara set her folder down and moved closer, her practical shoes making little noise on the floor. Just then, Lena Brooks also walked in, still in her scrubs from her nursing shift. "I saw your car outside, Ms. Wynne," Lena explained. "Thought I should check if there were any other details about Mama's will." Evan held up the doll. "There's something rattling inside. I didn't notice it last night when I fixed her." Lena's eyes widened. Mama was always hiding little treasures in unusual places. Said it was a habit from harder times. With practiced care, Evan located a nearly invisible seam in the doll's back, separate from his repair work. His fingers, calloused from years of detailed repairs, found a tiny catch. It clicked, and a small compartment opened. Inside lay a small brass key attached to what looked like an old-fashioned locket chain, along with a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. "May I?" Clara asked, reaching for the paper as Evan handed it to her. She unfolded it gently, revealing neat handwriting in faded blue ink. "To the one who mends, find the box," she read aloud. Lena moved closer, peering at the key. "I've never seen that before, and I thought I knew all Mama's hiding spots." "This looks like a bank safe deposit box key," Clara observed, taking the key and examining it in the light. "See these numbers along the side? That's typical for older models. Ruth was a client of mine for years, but she never mentioned having a safe deposit box." Evan turned the key over in his palm. It was warm from being hidden in the doll, its brass surface showing the patina of age. "Could we find out which bank it belongs to?" "The numbering style looks like First Nationals," Clara replied. "They've been here in Willowbend since before the war. Ruth did her banking there." Lena crossed her arms, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Mama must have had her reasons for hiding this. She never did anything without purpose. She paused, studying Evan. The fact that she left it in something she knew would need mending. "She couldn't have known I'd be the one to fix it," Evan said quietly. "Unless she did," Clara suggested. "The will specifically mentioned your reputation for helping people with repairs. Maybe this was part of her plan all along." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun catching dust motes in its beams. The old wall clock ticked steadily, marking time in the quiet shop. Evan rolled the small key between his fingers, feeling its weight. "The bank will be closed for the weekend now." He carefully tucked the key into his wallet. "I'll look into it first thing Monday morning." Lena nodded slowly. "I'd like to be there when you do, if that's all right. Whatever Mama left in that box, it's part of her story." "Of course," Clara added. "I should be present as well, given my role as executor of the will." She gathered her folder from the counter. "Shall we say Monday at 9? They agreed on the time, and Evan watched as both women left the shop. Through the window, he could see them talking on the sidewalk for a moment before heading their separate ways. He turned back to Lullaby, still sitting on the counter. The doll's painted face held its serene expression, keeping whatever other secrets it might have to itself. Evan carefully placed it back on the shelf, positioning it so the afternoon light caught its porcelain features just so. The brass key sat heavily in his wallet, its presence a reminder that Ruth Brooks's last wishes might be more complex than anyone had imagined. He busied himself with straightening the shop, trying not to let his mind race ahead to Monday morning. The glass doors of First National Bank reflected the crisp Saturday morning sunlight as Evan pushed them open. Inside, the marble-floored lobby felt cool and quiet, with only a few other customers conducting their weekend business. Clara Wynne stood waiting by the information desk, her gray hair neatly styled and a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Evan," she said warmly. "Did you bring the key?" Evan patted his shirt pocket. "Right here. Still can't believe we found it inside that doll." The bank manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, led them down to the vault area. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they followed him through a heavy door and into a room lined with metal safe deposit boxes. "Box 317, the manager announced, inserting his key. Evan's hands trembled slightly as he fitted Ruth's locket key into the second lock. The mechanism clicked, and the box slid out smoothly. They carried it to a private viewing room, where Clara carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay several manila envelopes, old photographs, and a worn, leather-bound ledger. The musty smell of aged paper filled the air. "Let's see what Ruth wanted us to find," Clara said, opening the ledger first. Her expression grew serious as she scanned the pages. "Oh my, Evan, look at this." The ledger contained carefully documented records spanning decades, property assessments, zoning changes, and handwritten notes about housing restrictions. Many entries were marked with red ink, highlighting systematic discrimination in Willow Bend's real estate practices. "These are redlining records," Clara explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Proof of how certain neighborhoods were deliberately undervalued and denied loans based on race." She turned another page. "And look here, recent correspondence between Councilman Hale and developers." Evan leaned closer, reading emails and meeting minutes that revealed plans for luxury condominiums. The development would effectively price out longtime residents in Ruth's historically black neighborhood. "Hale's been laying the groundwork for this for years," Clara said, pulling out more documents. Selective code enforcement, denied improvement permits, artificial property devaluation, all designed to make the area look run down so he could swoop in with his urban renewal project. Evan sat back, running a hand through his hair. So that's why Ruth chose her house for the community center. She was protecting the neighborhood. "Yes, but there's more." Clara pulled out the will's conditions page. "The center must open within 90 days and remain free to everyone. If these conditions aren't met, the property reverts to the city, right into Hale's hands." 90 days? Evan's stomach dropped. That's barely 3 months to renovate a historic house and start up programs from scratch. Ruth knew timing was critical. Hale's development plans go before the council in 4 months. Clara gathered the documents carefully. "We'll need copies of everything here. This evidence could be crucial if he tries to challenge the will." They spent the next hour photographing and scanning each document. The bank manager provided certified copies of the most important papers. By the time they finished, Evan's head was spinning with the weight of what they'd discovered. Back in the bank lobby, Clara touched his arm gently. "I know this is overwhelming, but Ruth chose you for a reason. She saw something in you, the same thing I see. You understand that mending isn't just about fixing objects." Evan nodded slowly, thinking of all the people who came to a shop with broken things that meant so much more than their monetary value. When you fix something important to someone, you're helping to heal a little piece of their world. "Exactly," Clara smiled. "That's what this center could be for the whole community, a place where people come together, where barriers break down over shared projects and conversations." "If we can pull it off in 90 days, Evan said. "We will." Clara's voice held steady confidence. "I'll start on the legal paperwork Monday. You focus on planning the space and programs." The rest of the day passed in a blur as Evan tried to process everything. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with Caleb, who was finishing a late dinner after skateboarding with friends. The overhead light cast a warm glow as Evan explained what they'd found in the safe deposit box. "So this councilman guy's been trying to force people out of their homes?" Caleb asked, pushing his empty plate aside. "That's messed up. It's more complicated than that, but yeah, essentially." Evan spread out some of the copied documents. "Ruth left us her house to stop it from happening, but we have to turn it into a community center in 90 days. "Dad," Caleb leaned forward, his expression serious. "This sounds bigger than just fixing toasters." The evening air hung heavy with humidity as Evan arranged the last of the folding chairs on Ruth's wraparound porch. The white paint was starting to peel in places, but the solid wooden boards still held firm, just like they had for decades of neighborhood gatherings. Clara stood near the porch steps, greeting arrivals with her choir director's smile and gesturing them toward the seats. Mrs. Patterson from the Quilting Guild arrived first, her silver hair gleaming in the porch light. She carried a worn photo album under one arm. Behind her came Mr. Jenkins from the Veterans Club, walking with his cane but standing straight-backed as ever in his VFW cap. "Evening, folks," Evan said, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Thanks for coming out tonight." More chairs filled as Pastor Lyle arrived with 3 church elders. Rose Martinez from the Quilting Guild brought homemade lemonade in a glass pitcher. The porch boards creaked under the weight of 24 community members, their murmured conversations mixing with the chirp of crickets in the yard. Lena Brooks stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, watching. Her nurse's aide scrub showed she'd come straight from her shift. Maya sat on the porch steps below her mother's feet, holding Lullaby and watching the grown-ups with curious eyes. Clara cleared her throat, and the conversations quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, Ruth Brooks left this house and a legacy fund to create a community arts and repair center. Evan Cole has been named steward of this project." "Why him?" The question came from Mr. Turner, one of the church elders. "No offense, son, but you're not from the neighborhood." Evan stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "That's a fair question. I didn't know Ruth personally, but she knew about my repair shop, how I try to help folks who can't afford new things. She wanted someone who could teach fixing and mending." Mrs. Patterson opened her photo album. "Ruth and I quilted together for 30 years. She always said this neighborhood needed a place where people could gather, learn from each other." She turned the album to show black and white photos of women sitting in a quilting circle on this very porch. "That was then," Lena spoke up, her voice firm. "Now we've got news vans driving by, taking pictures, people asking questions about why my mama chose a white man to run things. I don't want Maya growing up in some kind of circus." Several heads nodded. The creak of footsteps on the walk made everyone turn. Councilman Trent Hale stood at the bottom of the steps, his campaign poster smile firmly in place. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said smoothly. "Just wanted to see how our newest community organizer is settling in." His eyes swept over the peeling paint, the patched screen door. Evan straightened his shoulders. "We're having a neighborhood meeting, Councilman. Would you like to join us?" "Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I hope you realize what you're taking on here, Mr. Cole. Historic buildings have strict codes. Community centers need permits, insurance, safety inspections. It's quite complex." "That's why we're here," Clara interjected, her tone pleasant but firm. "To work together and figure things out." Of course," Hale nodded. "Just remember, there are other options if it becomes overwhelming. My office is always open to discuss alternatives." After Hale left, the mood on the porch felt heavier. Mr. Jenkins tapped his cane on the floorboards. "Boy's got a point about permits. City Hall's a maze of red tape." "I know how to file paperwork," Clara said, "and I know every building inspector in 3 counties. Rose Martinez raised her hand. "The Quilting Guild could teach classes. We've got plenty of supplies to share." "The VFW guys could help with repairs," Mr. Jenkins added. "Got some good handymen among us." But others looked uncertain. Pastor Lyle cleared his throat. "It's a big undertaking, Evan. Are you sure you can manage it?" "I have to try," Evan said quietly. "Ruth trusted me with this. She wanted a place where people could come together, learn from each other, where things that are broken can be fixed." Maya looked up from her doll. "Like how you fix Lullaby." "That's right, sweetheart." Evan smiled at her. "Sometimes the most important fixes aren't just about glue and tools." The meeting wound down as the mosquitoes came out. Some stayed to talk more, gathering in small groups. Mrs. Patterson showed Evan old photos of community gatherings. Mr. Jenkins promised to bring some of his VFW buddies by to look at the roof, but others left quickly, shaking their heads. Lena gathered Maya and left without a word, though the little girl waved goodbye. Pastor Lyle patted Evan's shoulder with a concerned look before walking to his car. As the porch emptied, Clara helped Evan fold up chairs. "It's a start," she said encouragingly. "Some of them think I'm crazy to try this," Evan replied, stacking chairs against the wall. Some of them think you're brave to try it, Clara countered. Focus on that. Finally, only a few supporters remained, discussing plans for cleanup days and class schedules. Evan shook their hands as they left, trying to hold on to their enthusiasm. But as he turned the key in the old front door lock, the weight of doubt settled heavy across his shoulders. The morning sun streamed through Ruth's house windows, casting long rectangles of light across drop cloths and paint cans. The musty smell of an empty home was already giving way to fresh paint and sawdust. Evan stood in what would become the main workshop area, rolling white primer on the walls with steady strokes. "Hey Dad, where do you want these shelves?" Caleb called from the hallway, his arms full of salvaged wooden boards they'd cleaned up the night before. "Stack them in the corner for now," Evan replied, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "We'll need to patch those walls first." More volunteers filtered in throughout the morning. Mrs. Patterson and 2 other Quilting Guild members arrived with coffee and donuts. 3 teenagers from Pastor Lyle's youth group showed up in paint-stained clothes, ready to work. The house hummed with activity and chatter. In the side yard, Caleb had set up an impromptu bike repair station under a maple tree. He'd brought his tools from home in their red metal toolbox, arranging them carefully on an old card table. 4 neighborhood kids watched with fascination as he demonstrated how to fix a flat tire. "See this patch kit?" Caleb held up the small box. "First, you've got to find where the air's escaping. That's why we use soapy water." He dipped the tire in a bucket, and bubbles formed around a tiny hole. The kids leaned in closer, eyes wide. "Can I try?" A boy about 12 raised his hand. "Sure thing," Caleb grinned, handing him the patch. "Just like we talked about. Clean the area, rough it up a little, apply the glue." Inside, Evan had moved to the front room, where he'd set up a radio repair station on a sturdy wooden table. 3 old radios sat before him, their cases open, waiting for his attention. He'd learned electronics repair in the Army, and the familiar work settled his nerves. "Those are beautiful," came Lena's voice from the doorway. She carried a box of mismatched teacups and an electric kettle. "My grandma had one just like that Philco there." Evan nodded. "They don't make them like this anymore. But they're usually pretty simple to fix." Lena surveyed the room, then moved to set up her tea station in the corner. She arranged the cups on a vintage metal tray she'd brought from home, plugged in the kettle, and set out containers of tea bags. "Thought folks might need refreshments while they work," she explained, "or just a quiet moment to sit." The morning wore on. More volunteers arrived. Someone brought sandwiches for lunch, and they all ate on the porch, passing around napkins and sharing stories about the neighborhood. Maya sat on the steps, holding lullaby and watching everything with bright eyes. "Mr. Evan," she called out suddenly during a lull in conversation, "you know what this place needs? A name. A real name." Evan set down his sandwich. "What did you have in mind?" Maya stood up, clutching her doll. "Well, there's all this fixing going on, stitching quilts and mending things. And then there's music too, 'cause the choir's gonna practice here, right?" Lena smiled at her daughter. "Go on, baby." "So I was thinking." Maya rocked back on her heels. "What about Stitch Song?" The porch fell quiet for a moment. Then Clara, who'd stopped by on her lunch break, nodded slowly. "That's actually perfect. It captures everything we're trying to do here." "Stitch Song," Evan repeated, testing the words. "I like it." The name spread through the house like a happy whisper. By afternoon, someone had written it in neat letters on a piece of cardboard and tacked it to the front door. The choir arrived for their first practice session in the living room, their voices floating through the open windows while people worked. Caleb's bike repair class had grown to 6 kids, all taking turns with the tools. He showed them how to adjust brakes, oil chains, and true wheels, explaining each step with patience. Some of the older volunteers stopped to watch, nodding approval at the way he connected with the children. At the tea station, Lena poured cups for tired painters and chatted with visitors. She kept an eye on everything while maintaining a warm presence that made people feel welcome. Even those who'd been skeptical about the project found themselves lingering over tea, sharing memories of Ruth and suggestions for the center. As the sun began to set, volunteers gradually packed up and headed home. Evan and Caleb gathered paint supplies in dirty rags, their clothes spattered with primer. The house felt different now, less empty, more alive with possibility. "Good day's work," Caleb said as they locked up. "Those kids really want to learn about bikes. I told them they could come back Saturday." They walked home in the golden evening light, their shadows stretching long on the sidewalk. The air was cooling, and somewhere a robin sang its evening song. For the first time since Ruth's will had upended his quiet life, Evan felt truly hopeful. This wasn't just about fixing things anymore. It was about building something new, something that mattered. Caleb bumped his shoulder against his father's. "You've got white paint in your hair, by the way." "You've got some on your nose," Evan replied, and they both laughed, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm as they headed home. The morning breeze scattered fallen leaves across Main Street sidewalks, carrying with it something else: white paper flyers that fluttered against storefront windows and lampposts. Evan noticed them on his way to open the shop, his steps slowing as he caught sight of the bold black text. "Who is Evan Cole, and why does he want our heritage?" His hands trembled slightly as he pulled one down to read. The flyer painted him as an opportunist, questioning how a white mechanic had suddenly inherited such a significant piece of black community history. The words stung, but what hurt more was the grain of truth in them. He was an outsider here. "Don't let them get to you," came Clara's voice from behind him. She stood there in her navy blazer, briefcase in hand, looking concerned. "I've been seeing these all morning." Evan crumpled the flyer. "They're not wrong to question it. I've been asking myself the same thing." "Ruth chose you for a reason," Clara said firmly. She glanced up and down the street. "But we've got bigger problems. The zoning board called this morning. Apparently, there are some irregularities with the property's classification for public gathering spaces." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means someone's trying to create bureaucratic hurdles." Clara's mouth tightened. The timing's too convenient to be coincidence. The bell above Evan's shop door chimed as they stepped inside. Clara set her briefcase on the counter while Evan flipped on the lights. The morning sun caught the repaired porcelain doll on its shelf, making its glazed surface gleam. "I've got the paperwork started to address the zoning issues," Clara continued, "but it'll take time we don't have. The 90-day deadline." Her words were cut off by the shop phone ringing. Evan answered it, his expression shifting from confusion to careful neutrality. "That was Councilman Hale's office," he said after hanging up. "He wants to meet for lunch. Today." Clara's eyebrows rose. "Be careful, Evan. He didn't get where he is by being straightforward." "I know." Evan ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "But maybe we can sort this out reasonably." The diner on Cherry Street was half full when Evan arrived at noon. Hale sat in a corner booth, his silver hair perfectly combed, wearing a crisp, button-down shirt that probably cost more than Evan's monthly rent. He stood with a practiced smile, extending his hand. "Evan, thanks for coming. Please sit." The vinyl booth squeaked as Evan settled in. A waitress appeared immediately, clearly prearranged by Hale. "2 house specials," Hale said smoothly, not bothering to ask Evan's preference. "And coffee for both of us." He waited until she left before leaning forward. "I'll get right to the point. This situation with Ruth's property, it's causing unnecessary tension in our community." Evan met his gaze steadily. "The center will bring people together. That's what Ruth wanted." "Ah, yes, Ruth's wishes." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Noble intentions, certainly, but perhaps not practical in today's economic climate. "The neighborhood needs revitalization, investment. It needs community," Evan countered quietly. Hale reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. "I have a proposal that could benefit everyone. The development company I represent is prepared to make a very generous offer for the property. You'd be compensated well above market value, and we could establish a memorial fund in Ruth's name." He slid the folder across the table. Evan didn't open it. "The will specifically prohibits selling the property," Evan said. "Wills can be challenged. Arrangements can be made." Hale's voice lowered. "Think about it, Evan. You're a small business owner, a single father. This could secure your future, your son's education. Why take on this burden? These complications?" Their food arrived, steam rising from plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Evan hadn't touched his coffee. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. But I made a promise, not just to Ruth's memory, but to the people who believe in what we're trying to build. I can't break that trust." Hale's pleasant expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "You're facing significant obstacles, zoning issues, community resistance. These problems could multiply. Is that a warning?" "Simply an observation." Hale dabbed his mouth with a napkin and stood. "Think about my offer, Evan. Change is coming to Willowbend one way or another. Best to be on the right side of it." He placed some bills on the table. "Lunch is on me. Take the folder. Read it over." Evan watched through the diner's window as Hale walked to his glossy black Mercedes. The knot in his stomach tightened as the car pulled away, leaving him alone with an untouched plate and a folder he wouldn't open. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Evan pulled up to First National Bank. Clara was already waiting by the entrance, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. She handed one to Evan as he approached. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. "Not much." Evan took a grateful sip. "After Hale's visit yesterday, I kept thinking about what else might be in that box, what Ruth was trying to tell us." They waited for the bank manager to arrive, the cool morning air making them pull their jackets tighter. Inside, the marble floors echoed with their footsteps as they followed Mrs. Patterson to the safe deposit vault. "Take all the time you need," the manager said, leaving them alone with a metal box on a private table. Clara pulled out her legal pad while Evan carefully removed the contents. The ledger documenting Hale's development schemes they'd seen before. But underneath lay something they hadn't fully examined, a thick leather-bound book with memories embossed in faded gold letters. "A scrapbook?" Clara said softly. Evan opened it gently. The first pages showed Ruth as a young woman, standing proud in front of the house they were now trying to save. Photos of community gatherings followed, church picnics, choir performances, graduation celebration. Wait. Evan's hand froze on a yellowed program from 1992. This was the Easter cantata at First Baptist. He pointed to a line in the list of performers. "Sarah Cole, soprano soloist." "Sarah?" Clara leaned closer. "Your wife?" Evan nodded, his throat tight. He turned the page, and there she was. Sarah in her blue choir robe, dark hair falling past her shoulders, smile radiant as she sang. He hadn't seen this photo before. "I knew she sang in some church choirs, but I never." His voice trailed off as he found more pictures. Sarah helping at a church supper. Sarah and Ruth standing together after a performance, Ruth's arm around her shoulders like a proud mother. Clara squeezed his arm gently. Ruth knew her well, it seems. But why didn't Sarah ever mention it? Evan wondered aloud, carefully turning more pages. The answer came a few photos later, a newspaper clipping about Sarah's death. Next to it, Ruth had written in elegant script, "A voice silenced too soon. The Angels gained a beautiful soprano today." Beneath that was an envelope addressed in the same handwriting, "For Caleb Cole, when you need it most." With slightly shaking hands, Evan opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Caleb, you won't remember me. You were just learning to walk when your mama used to bring you to choir practice. Such a bright little boy, always trying to conduct along with the music. Your mama had a voice that could lift hearts to heaven, but her real gift was seeing the light in others. She told me once that's what drew her to your daddy, his gentle hands that could fix anything broken. I've watched you grow up from afar, seen you skating past my house with your friends, heard about your own gift for helping younger children learn. You have your mama's heart and your daddy's hands. What a blessing that combination is. Life isn't always kind to sensitive souls like yours. If you ever feel lost or alone, my porch light stays on until midnight. Sometimes just knowing there's a light burning for you is enough to find your way back home. Your mama's voice still echoes in our choir loft. When you're ready to hear it, come sit in the back pew some Sunday morning. Music has a way of mending hearts, just like your daddy mends broken things. With love, Ruth Brooks. Evan had to blink hard several times. She knew us all along. She was watching over us. Clara was studying the scrapbook's later pages. "Look at this." She kept newspaper clippings about your repair shop opening. Photos of Caleb teaching those kids to fix their bikes last summer. She saw everything. "Not just saw," Evan said quietly. "She understood. When she chose me for this, she wasn't picking a stranger at all." They spent the next hour going through every document, every photo, every careful notation Ruth had made. The story of Willowbend's struggles and triumphs unfolded through her eyes. The fight against redlining in the 60s, the community garden started during hard times, the unity found in music and shared meals. When they finally closed the safe deposit box, the morning fog had lifted to reveal a brilliant blue sky. Clara carried the scrapbook carefully wrapped in her briefcase as they walked to their cars. "Take it home," she said, handing it to Evan. "It belongs in Ruth's house now, your house." That evening, Evan sat alone in Ruth's parlor, his parlor now, though it didn't feel quite right to claim it that way. The only light came from a small lamp on an end table, casting warm shadows across the flowered wallpaper. The scrapbook lay heavy in his lap as he slowly turned the pages again. Sarah's smile beamed up at him, forever young, forever singing. He could almost hear her voice, mixing with the choir in the old photos. All those years, Ruth had been keeping these memories safe, watching over his family from a distance, believing in them enough to entrust them with her legacy. His fingers traced the words she'd written to Caleb about having his mother's heart and his father's hands. The truth of her insight hit him anew. She had seen them all so clearly, had understood what they could become before they knew it themselves. The room felt different now, less like a responsibility and more like a gift. Every crack in the plaster, every worn floorboard, every faded curtain held stories, not just Ruth's, but a whole community's. And somehow, without his knowing it, his family story had been woven into this tapestry all along. Evan sat with the scrapbook in the quiet house, surrounded by the gentle glow of the lamp and decades of memories carefully preserved by a woman who had known exactly what she was doing when she chose him to carry her dream forward. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ruth's front lawn as Evan adjusted the last paper lantern on the porch. He stepped back, taking in the sight of the old house transformed. White chairs lined up neatly on the grass faced the wide front steps that would serve as their stage. The spring breeze carried the sweet scent of lilacs from Ruth's garden. "Looking good, Dad," Caleb called out, wheeling his bike around the side of the house. He'd spent the afternoon setting up a small repair station near the carriage house, complete with tools and spare parts. Inside, the parlor buzzed with activity. Clara directed choir members through a quick rehearsal while quilting guild ladies arranged displays of mended treasures on fold-out tables. Radios that once crackled with static now played crystal-clear melodies. Porcelain dolls sat pretty in their fresh clothes, their once broken limbs carefully restored. Maya darted between the displays, lullaby clutched to her chest. "Mr. Evan, look what Mrs. Henderson fixed." She pointed to a weathered teddy bear sporting fresh stitches and a tiny bow tie. Her eyes sparkled with the pure joy only an 8-year-old could muster. People began arriving just as the sun dipped low enough to make the lanterns glow. They came in 2s and 3s, some carrying dishes for the potluck table, others simply curious about the changes to Ruth's old place. Evan noticed how they naturally mixed. Seniors from both sides of town, young families, veterans in their caps, teenagers on bikes. Pastor Lyle opened with a blessing that brought tears to a few eyes. "Let this place," he said, his voice warm and steady, "be a shelter where broken things find healing, both the objects we hold dear and the bonds between us all." The choir's first notes of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" floated out across the gathering. Evan watched as people who might never have spoken to each other began swaying together to the music. Mrs. Watson, who'd lived next door to Ruth for 40 years, reached for Lena's hand during the chorus. Between songs, people shared stories. Mr. Jenkins, still wearing his VFW cap, showed off the 1940s radio Evan had repaired. "Belonged to my father," he explained to the crowd. "Now my grandkids can hear the same baseball games he listened to." Clara stepped forward with a quilt that the guild had restored. Its patches told the history of Willowbend in fabric, the old mill, the church steeples, the railroad that once ran through town. "This reminds us," she said, her voice clear and strong, "that we're all stitched into the same story." As the formal program wound down, people lingered in small groups, examining the displays and sharing desserts. Evan noticed Caleb leading Maya toward his repair station, her small hand gripping the handlebar of a purple bicycle with training wheels. "Want to learn?" Caleb asked her, adjusting the seat height. Maya nodded eagerly while Lena watched from nearby, smiling her approval. Evan felt Clara's presence before he saw her, a gentle warmth at his elbow. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Caleb jogged alongside Maya's wobbly first attempts. "You're doing something remarkable here," Clara said softly. Her hand found his, giving it a brief, warm squeeze that sent a flutter through his chest. He turned to look at her, seeing in her eyes the same hope he felt growing in his own heart. Maya's delighted laugh drew their attention back to the lawn. She had managed several feet on her own, Caleb cheering her on. "I'm doing it," she called out. "Grandma Ruth, are you watching? I'm really doing it." The moment crystallized everything the center was meant to be: generations connecting, skills being passed on, joy shared freely. Evan thought of the photo in Ruth's scrapbook, his late wife singing in her choir, and felt the threads of past and present weaving together. As the sky deepened to purple, people began gathering their dishes and saying goodbyes. The quilting ladies promised to return Tuesday with more projects. Veterans talked about starting a weekly coffee morning. Young mothers arranged carpools for future choir practices. Maya hugged her doll close as Lena led her toward their car. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want to practice my bike riding some more." "The center opens properly next week," Evan told her, "but I think we can arrange something." Caleb helped stack chairs while Clara gathered sheet music. The last visitors waved from their cars, headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Finally, only the soft glow of the paper lanterns remained. Evan stood on the porch, key in hand, taking in the quiet aftermath. Empty plates, scattered programs, and moved furniture spoke of life returning to Ruth's house. Through the window, he could see the display of mended treasures waiting for next week's proper opening. His fingers brushed the brass key, warm from being in his pocket all evening. The same key that had unlocked Ruth's front door for decades now rested in his hand, entrusted with continuing her legacy of welcome and repair. For the first time since receiving the news of Ruth's will, Evan felt the full rightness of her choice. This wasn't just about fixing broken objects. It was about mending the fabric of community, one stitch at a time. He locked the door with care, each click of the mechanism feeling like a promise kept. The porch light stayed on, just as Ruth would have wanted, a beacon of welcome in the growing dark. The phone's shrill ring pierced the darkness. Evan bolted upright in bed, his heart racing. The bedside clock read 2:17 a.m. Nobody called at this hour unless something was wrong. "Hello?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Mr. Cole? This is Officer Martinez. There's a fire at the Brooks property, the carriage shed." The words snapped him fully awake. "Fire department's already on scene." Evan was already pulling on his jeans. "I'm on my way." He grabbed his keys and jacket, stumbling down the hallway. "Caleb!" he called out, knocking on his son's door. "Stay here. There's a fire at Ruth's. I'll call you." The drive that usually took 10 minutes felt endless. Evan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he turned onto Cedar Street. The flashing lights of fire trucks and police cars lit up the night sky in angry pulses of red and blue. The acrid smell of smoke hit him before he even got out of his truck. Two firefighters directed hoses at the carriage shed, where wisps of gray smoke still curled from the weathered wood siding. Water pooled in the gravel driveway, reflecting the emergency lights like broken glass. A small crowd of neighbors stood behind the yellow police tape, whispering and pointing. Claire broke away from talking to a police officer and hurried over to him. Her usually neat hair was tied back messily, her face drawn with worry. "I got here about 20 minutes ago. Someone driving by saw the smoke and called 911. "How bad?" Evan asked, his throat tight. "The structure's still standing, but..." She touched his arm gently. "A lot of the donations we were storing in there are damaged. And the photo wall." Evan's stomach dropped. The photo wall had been a labor of love. Dozens of pictures from Ruth's collection showing the neighborhood's history, carefully arranged and framed. They'd only finished hanging them last week. Fire Chief Rodriguez approached, removing his helmet. His expression was grim. "Mr. Cole, we've got it contained now, but I need to tell you, this wasn't an accident." "What do you mean?" "We found evidence of accelerant, probably gasoline. From the smell, someone poured it along the base of the east wall and lit it up." The chief's jaw tightened. Classic arson pattern. Evan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He walked closer to the shed, stopping where a firefighter held up his hand. From here, he could see inside through the open doors. Water dripped from the ceiling beams, boxes of donated items, old radios, small appliances, toys waiting to be fixed, sat in sodden heaps. The photo wall was a blackened mess, frames warped and glass shattered. Officer Martinez was taking notes nearby. "We'll need a list of anyone who might have had issues with the center opening. Any threats or confrontations recently?" Evan thought of the anonymous flyers, of Hale's thinly veiled warnings. But accusations without proof would only make things worse. "I'll think about it and let you know." More neighbors were gathering now. He spotted Lena's car pulling up, Maya's small face pressed against the passenger window. The sight of the little girl's worried expression made his chest ache. "The security camera," Clara said suddenly. "We installed one last week, remember? On the corner of the main house." They hurried to check, but the camera had been spray-painted black sometime earlier in the night. Another clear sign this was no accident. The next hour passed in a blur of official statements and insurance forms. Dawn was breaking by the time the fire trucks finally pulled away. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. Caleb showed up despite being told to stay home, bringing coffee and donuts for the remaining police officers and volunteers who had come to help. The teen's face was serious as he surveyed the damage. "Dad, this is bad, like really bad." "We'll fix it," Evan said automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. Some of the Quilting Guild ladies were carefully laying out smoke-damaged photos on the porch, seeing what could be salvaged. Most were beyond saving. Mrs. Henderson held up one that had somehow survived, a faded image of Ruth as a young woman, standing proud in front of the house. The edges were singed, but her smile remained clear and determined. Lena approached Evan, her expression torn between anger and concern. "This is exactly what I was worried about, things getting out of hand." She glanced at Maya, who was sitting quietly on the porch steps with Lullaby in her lap. "Maybe we need to step back, rethink this whole thing." "Lena, please," Evan started, but she shook her head. "I can't let my daughter be caught in the middle of whatever this is turning into." Her voice was firm but gentle. "I'm sorry, Evan, I really am." The sun was fully up now, harsh morning light revealing the full extent of the damage. The shed's east wall was a charred skeleton, paint bubbled and peeling. Puddles of dirty water reflected the blue sky, incongruously cheerful against the destruction. Evan stood alone in front of the shed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The smell of smoke had seeped into his clothes, his hair, seeming to settle into his very bone. His jaw clenched as he stared at the blackened timbers, feeling the weight of all they'd lost, not just photos and donations, but something less tangible. Trust, hope, the feeling that they were doing something right and good. The scene faded into silence as neighbors drifted away and police finished their work. Only the steady drip of water from the damaged roof broke the morning quiet. Evan remained motionless, his expression hardening as he took in the devastation before him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ruth's front porch, where Evan stood staring at the bright orange notice taped to the door. The bold black letters seemed to shout their message: "Condemned, unsafe for occupancy." Below, in smaller print, "By order of Willowbin Building and Safety Department." His fingers trembled as he peeled back the corner of the notice to read the full text. Fire damage, structural concerns, potential code violations, the list went on. Two city inspectors in khaki uniforms stood at the bottom of the porch steps, clipboards in hand. "Sorry, Mr. Cole," the older inspector said, not quite meeting Evan's eyes. "Orders from above. No one's allowed inside until a full safety review is completed." "How long will that take?" Evan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Could be weeks, maybe longer." The younger inspector shuffled his feet. "You'll need to submit detailed repair plans, get multiple approvals." A black SUV pulled up to the curb, and Councilman Hale stepped out, straightening his tie. He climbed the steps with practiced authority, nodding to the inspectors. "Gentlemen, Mr. Cole." "What's this about, Hale?" Evan demanded. "Public safety, pure and simple." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Last night's fire exposed serious concerns. As a city official, I have a responsibility to protect our citizens." Before Evan could respond, a news van from the local station pulled up. Hale turned smoothly toward the approaching reporter and cameraman. "I'll make a brief statement," he announced. "Councilman Hale." The reporter thrust her microphone forward. "What can you tell us about the situation here?" "The city is taking necessary precautions following a suspicious fire at this historic property," Hale began, his voice practiced and grave. "Initial inspections have revealed multiple safety hazards that put our community at risk. While we appreciate Mr. Cole's intentions, we cannot allow sentiment to override public safety." Evan watched in helpless frustration as Hale continued his performance. By now, several cars had slowed to watch, and people were gathering on the sidewalk. He could hear their whispered conversations. "I heard it was arson. Why did Ruth Brooks give it to him anyway? Something's not right about the whole thing." The crowd parted as Lena's car pulled up. She got out, gripping Maya's hand tightly. The little girl clutched Lullaby to her chest, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "Mama, why are there TV people?" Maya asked. Lena didn't answer. She strode up to Evan, her face tight with worry. "I saw the news alert on my phone. What's happening?" Before Evan could explain, Hale spotted them and shifted his attention. "Ah, Ms. Brooks. As a daughter of this community, surely you share our concerns about the safety of this property and its current management." Lena's jaw clenched. She looked from Hale to the news camera, then down at Maya, who was pressing closer to her leg. "I need to get my daughter to school," she said finally. "Maya, come on." "But Mama, what about our tea corner and the choir practice tonight?" "Not now, baby." Lena's voice was gentle but firm. She turned to Evan, speaking low. "I'm sorry, but I can't let Maya get caught up in all this, with the fire, and now reporters. It's too much." "Lena, please," Evan started. "We can fix this." She shook her head, already leading Maya away. "I have to think about my daughter's safety first. My mama would understand that." Maya looked back over her shoulder, confusion and disappointment written across her small face. Evan watched them go, feeling something crucial slipping away. Throughout the morning, more people arrived. Clara came with a stack of legal papers, trying to fight the condemnation order. Pastor Lyle stopped by to offer support, but others just drove past slowly, pointing and talking. By afternoon, local social media was buzzing with speculation and rumors. Someone had posted an old photo of Ruth, suggesting she'd been manipulated into changing her will. Another claimed the fire was staged to collect insurance money. Each new theory seemed worse than the last. The Quilting Guild called to cancel their weekend session. The veterans group sent a polite email about taking a break until things settled down. Even the choir director left a message about finding alternate practice space temporarily. As the sun began to set, Evan sat alone in Ruth's parlor, technically breaking the condemnation order just by being there. The room was growing dark, but he couldn't bring himself to turn on the lights. His phone buzzed occasionally, with messages from Caleb asking if he was okay, but he couldn't find the words to respond. The parlor still smelled faintly of smoke from the shed fire. In the dimness, he could make out the shapes of Ruth's furniture, the old upright piano, the comfortable chairs where just days ago people had sat sharing stories and hope. Now it all felt hollow. He thought of Maya's face as Lena led her away, of the trust that had been building among neighbors now fractured by suspicion. Ruth had believed in him, had seen something worth trusting. But maybe everyone else was right. Maybe he was in over his head. Evan buried his face in his hands, the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. The dream of Stitch Song felt like it was crumbling around him, as broken as Maya's doll had been that first night in his shop. Only this time, he didn't know if he had the power to fix it. Over the next week, Main Street felt different to Evan. The usual friendly waves and morning greetings had turned to hurried glances and sudden interest in storefront windows. Mrs. Peterson, who'd brought cookies to every volunteer day, crossed to the other side when she saw him coming. Even old Jim from the hardware store, who'd known Evan for 15 years, just gave a tight nod and kept walking. The whispers followed him like shadows. In the diner, conversations would hush when he walked in, then resume in low murmurs once he passed. Taking advantage, he caught snippets, Ruth's legacy, and who does he think he is? At his shop, the phone barely rang anymore. The regulars who'd brought in their broken appliances weekly now stayed away. The empty chairs where the Veterans Club members used to gather for coffee sat untouched, collecting dust. Clara stopped by midweek, her face lined with concern but her spine straight as ever. She found Evan at his workbench, mechanically fixing a toaster nobody would come to claim. "They're saying I forged the will," Evan said without looking up, his voice hollow. "That I somehow planned this whole thing." Clara pulled up a stool beside him. "I know what they're saying, and it's nonsense. I was there when we opened that sealed envelope." Ruth's signature was verified by 3 witnesses. "Facts don't seem to matter much right now." Evan set down his screwdriver with a quiet click. The Quilting Guild canceled their workshop. The choirs moved rehearsals back to the church. Even the kids' bike repair program. He swallowed hard. Caleb said only 2 showed up yesterday. People are scared, Evan. Scared of change, scared of conflict. And Hale's playing on those fears. Clara's hand found his shoulder, steady and warm. But fear burns itself out. Truth lasts. Evan smiled weakly. "You sound like Pastor Lyle." "Speaking of whom?" Clara nodded toward the shop door. The bell jingled, and Pastor Lyle's familiar figure appeared, carrying his battered leather Bible and wearing the gentle smile that had guided the congregation through countless troubles. "Thought I might find you here," the pastor said, settling into one of the empty chairs. "Martha sent along some cornbread. Says your shop's been looking too quiet lately." Evan started to protest, but Pastor Lyle held up a hand. Now, before you tell me you're fine, let me share something. When I was a young man, right here in Willow Bend, I watched Ruth Brooks stand up to people who said she didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. They spread rumors about her too, said she was troublemaking, said she was pushing too hard, too fast. He leaned forward, his eyes kind but intense. You know what she told me? She said, Lyle, when God gives you a torch to carry, you don't set it down just because the wind picks up. This feels like more than wind, Evan said quietly. The condemned notice, the rumors, Lena pulling away. I'm not just failing myself anymore, I'm failing Ruth's memory. Are you? Pastor Lyle asked. Or are you living it? Ruth knew what she was doing when she chose you. She saw something in you that maybe you don't see yourself. Clara nodded. He's right, Evan. This is exactly why Ruth wanted someone like you, someone who fixes things, who sees value in what others throw away. But how do I fix this? Evan gestured helplessly at the empty shop. You can't glue trust back together like a broken plate. Maybe not, Pastor Lyle agreed. But remember what young Maya said about mending twice? Once with glue, once with love, Evan quoted softly. Exactly. The glue part, that's the legal papers, the permits, the technical repairs. Important, yes, but the love part? Pastor Lyle tapped his Bible. That's the harder work. That's showing up every day, staying steady when others waver, believing in the dream even when you're the only one who can see it. They sat in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the dusty shop windows. Outside, a few people hurried past, their heads down. I should be getting back, Clara said finally, standing. But Evan, don't you dare give up. Ruth didn't choose wrong. Pastor Lyle stood too, leaving the wrapped cornbread on the counter. Martha will ask if you ate this. Don't make me lie to my wife. Their attempts at lightness fell flat in the heavy air. After they left, Evan moved through the shop like a ghost, straightening items that hadn't been touched in days. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the tick of the old wall clock. At 4 o'clock, 2 hours earlier than usual, he walked to the door and flipped the sign to closed. The sound of the lock turning felt like a small surrender. The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of First Methodist, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden pews. Evan sat alone in the back row, his shoulders hunched under his Sunday suit that felt a size too big these days. The familiar scent of old hymnals and lemon polish wrapped around him like a well-worn blanket. Pastor Lyle stood at the pulpit, his silver hair catching the light. His voice carried clearly through the hushed sanctuary. Today, we're going to talk about something my grandmother taught me about mending. He began, removing his reading glasses. She always said there are 2 parts to fixing anything that's broken. Evan's hands, rough from years of repair work, lay still in his lap. A few rows ahead, he could see Clara's straight back, her choir robe draped perfectly across her shoulders. She hadn't spoken to him since the condemnation notice went up. The first mending, Pastor Lyle continued, is the physical repair, the stitches in torn fabric, the glue in broken pottery, the bandage on a scraped knee. He paused, his kind eyes scanning the congregation. But my grandmother insisted that was only half the job. The second mending, she said, was healing the heart behind the break. Something stirred in Evan's memory, Maya's voice that first night in his shop. Grandma said when things break, you mend them twice. You see, Pastor Lyle's voice grew softer, more personal. When something breaks between people, the physical distance is just the beginning. Pride gets wounded, trust cracks, hearts grow hard. And sometimes, we focus so much on being right that we forget about being whole. Mrs. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in her seat across the aisle. Several other congregation members looked down at their hands. Now, my grandmother had a special way with broken things. Pastor Lyle smiled. Whether it was a chipped teacup or a neighborhood quarrel, she knew the secret. Humility opens more doors than pride ever could. Evan felt something loosen in his chest, like a rusty bolt finally turning free. He'd been so focused on proving himself worthy of Ruth's trust that he'd forgotten about earning the community's trust. The second mending, Pastor Lyle continued, requires us to lay down our defenses. To say, I might have gotten this wrong. To invite others to help us see what we've missed. He closed his Bible gently. Because true healing isn't about winning. It's about weaving our broken pieces back together, stronger than before. After the service, while others filed out to coffee hour, Evan sat in his pew, letting the words sink in. The sunlight had shifted, painting new patterns on the floor. He thought about Ruth's house, standing empty and condemned. About Maya's tears when Lena pulled her away. About all the broken connections that needed more than just glue to heal. Pastor Lyle appeared beside him, settling into the pew with a soft groan. "Seems like you heard something you needed today," he said quietly. Evan nodded, his throat tight. "I've been trying to carry this alone," he admitted, "trying to prove I deserved Ruth's trust." Pastor Lyle hummed. "And how's that working out?" A weak laugh escaped Evan. "About as well as trying to fix a clock with only half the gears. You know," Pastor Lyle said, "Ruth never did anything alone. That was her strength. She knew how to gather people, how to make them feel like they belonged to something bigger than themselves." Evan straightened up, something clicking into place. "I need to apologize," he said, "to everyone. And not just apologize. I need to invite them in, really in." Pastor Lyle smiled, patting Evan's shoulder as he stood. "Now that sounds like something Ruth would do." That afternoon, Evan sat at his kitchen table, drafting and redrafting a letter. Crumpled papers littered the floor around his feet. Finally, he looked down at the words he'd written. "To my neighbors in Willow Bend, I owe you an apology. In trying to honor Ruth Brooks's dream, I forgot her most important lesson, that true mending takes all of us, working together. I'm sorry for any hurt or mistrust I've caused. This center isn't meant to be my project. It's meant to be ours. Our story, our healing, our community. I'm inviting you to help shape what happens next. Whether you have questions, concerns, or ideas, I want to hear them. Let's gather this Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. on Ruth's porch and talk, really talk, about how we can make this dream belong to all of us. Because Ruth was right. When things break, you mend them twice. Once with action and once with love. With hope and humility." Evan Cole. He read it over one more time, then carefully copied it onto fresh paper in his neatest handwriting. The sun was setting as he walked to Ruth's house, casting long shadows across the condemned notice that still hung on the front door. Next to it, he pinned his letter, smoothing it carefully against the wood. For a moment, he stood there on the porch, remembering the sound of choir music and children's laughter that had filled this space just weeks ago. The evening breeze stirred the paper gently, like a promise waiting to be kept. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Ruth's house, casting long shadows across the damaged doll display. Evan moved methodically along the shelves, wiping away soot marks with a damp cloth. Each porcelain face seemed to watch him with painted eyes that held stories he was only beginning to understand. "Need any help?" Clara's voice came from the doorway. She'd taken to stopping by after her office closed, her briefcase still in hand, heels clicking on the hardwood floors. "I've got it," Evan said, carefully lifting Lullaby from her perch. "Just trying to make everything presentable for tomorrow's meeting." The doll's dress was still pristine, but something felt different as he turned it in his hands. The weight wasn't quite right. He'd repaired enough music boxes over the years to recognize when their mechanisms were misaligned. "Something wrong?" Clara asked, setting down her briefcase and moving closer. "Maybe." Evan carried the doll to the work table he'd set up near the window. His fingers found the tiny access panel on Lullaby's back, hidden beneath her lace collar. "The music box feels off." Clara leaned in, watching as he eased the panel open with practiced care. Inside, the brass cylinder and comb looked normal, but when he tilted the doll slightly, there was an odd rattling sound. "That shouldn't be there," he muttered, reaching for his smallest screwdriver. Working with the precision that had earned him his reputation, Evan carefully loosened the music box housing. Behind it, tucked into a space barely larger than a matchbox, was a small cassette tape. "Look at this," he said softly, easing it out. The tape was labeled in neat handwriting. "My Testament, Ruth Brooks." Clara's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. "Evan, do you know what this could mean?" He turned the tape over in his hands. It was one of those mini cassettes used in old dictation machines, the kind lawyers kept on their desks 20 years ago. "My office still has a player," Clara said, already reaching for her phone. "Let me make a call." 20 minutes later, they sat in Ruth's parlor, an ancient dictation machine borrowed from Clara's paralegal whirring to life. Ruth's voice filled the room, as clear and strong as if she were sitting in her favorite chair by the window. "This is Ruth Eleanor Brooks, recording my verbal testament to supplement my written will," the voice began. "I am of sound mind and body, and I make this recording of my own free will." Evan's hands gripped the arms of his chair as Ruth's voice continued, laying out her wishes for the sinner with crystal clarity. To the mender with gentle hands, and yes, I mean you, Evan Cole, I entrust my home and my dream. I've watched you these past years, fixing what others would throw away, treating every broken thing with respect. When Mrs. Henderson told me how you repaired her late husband's radio for free, just so she could hear their favorite station again, I knew you understood what mending truly means. Clara was taking rapid notes, her legal mind already working through the implications. But Evan barely noticed, lost in Ruth's words. Some will question my choice, Ruth's voice continued. They'll wonder why I chose a white man to steward a home that's been a landmark in our black community for generations. But I've learned that the truest bonds aren't built on what separates us, but on what we share and what we're willing to give each other. The tape crackled with Ruth's warm chuckle. Besides, anyone who can fix Mrs. Henderson's ancient Philco without charging a widow a dime has the kind of heart this place needs. Evan felt his eyes growing damp. He remembered that Radio Pizzo. It had taken him 3 evenings to track down the problem. But Mrs. Henderson's smile when it finally played her and her late husband's song had been worth every minute. This recording, hidden in my lullaby doll, serves as verbal confirmation of my written will. The music box was always a little off. I knew someone with the right touch would find it eventually. Let it stand as proof that my choice was made freely and with full consideration. Clara's pen flew across her legal pad. This is exactly what we needed, she said. A contemporaneous recording confirming your selection with clear reasoning and evidence of her sound judgment. Hale can't fight this. But Evan was barely listening to the legal implications. Ruth's voice had softened, becoming more personal. To those who doubt this choice, remember that mending isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about believing that broken things still have value. That's what this center must be, a place where everyone's value is recognized, where we mend our community by mending together. The tape clicked to a stop. In the silence that followed, Evan could almost feel Ruth's presence in the room, as real as the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Clara touched his arm gently. I'll have this transcribed first thing tomorrow. With this and the documentation from the safe deposit box, we can file for an emergency injunction against the condemnation order. Evan nodded, carefully removing the tape and slipping it into his pocket. Its slight weight felt like an anchor, something solid to hold on to after weeks of uncertainty. For the first time since the fire, he felt a spark of hope flickering in his chest. Ruth thought of everything, he said quietly, looking around the room that had become so familiar over the past weeks. She just waited for the right person to find it all. Clara smiled, gathering her notes. She knew what she was doing. She didn't just leave you a building, Evan. She left you a mission, and now she's given us the tools to defend it. Morning sunlight filtered through the courthouse's tall windows as Clara strode purposefully down the marble hallway, her heels echoing with each determined step. Under her arm, she carried a thick manila folder containing Ruth's cassette tape and supporting documents. Evan walked beside her, his weathered hands fidgeting with his tie. "You're sure this will work?" he asked quietly. Clara's confident smile didn't waver. Ruth's voice is clear as a bell on that tape. And her intentions? Even clearer. They passed through the heavy wooden doors into Judge Marshall's chambers. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, looked up from her desk. "Mrs. Wynne, Mr. Cole," she nodded. "I understand you have new evidence regarding the Brooks estate." Clara placed the cassette player on the judge's desk. "Your Honor, we've discovered Ruth Brooks's audio testament, recorded just weeks before her passing." The room fell silent as Ruth's warm, firm voice filled the air. "I, Ruth Marie Brooks, being of sound mind, do hereby declare my wishes for my property and legacy fund." As the recording continued, Evan watched the judge's expression shift from professional neutrality to genuine interest. Back at Ruth's house, the community had mobilized. The Quilting Guild had taken over the front parlor, their needles flashing in the morning light as they worked to repair smoke-damaged quilts. Mrs. Patterson, the guild's president, directed operations from her rocking chair. "Careful with that backing, Helen," she called out. "Ruth always said a rush stitch makes twice the work." Through the windows, Evan could see the Veterans Club hard at work rebuilding the carriage shed. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, punctuated by good-natured arguing about the proper way to set a support beam. "Hey, Dad!" Caleb's voice carried across the yard. He was helping the veterans, his skateboard propped against the porch railing. Mr. Johnson says we'll have the frame up by sunset. The front screen door creaked, and Evan turned to see Lena Brooks standing there, clutching a thick manila envelope. Her nurse's aide uniform suggested she'd come straight from her night shift, but her eyes were alert and determined. "Got a minute?" she asked, her voice tight with contained emotion. They sat at Ruth's kitchen table, where Lena spread out printed emails and documents from the ledger copies. "Mama kept everything," she said, pointing to highlighted sections. "Look at these emails from Hale to the developers. They were planning this takeover for months." Evan leaned forward, reading snippets about strategic acquisitions and demographic shifts. His stomach turned at the cold calculations laid out in black and white. "There's more," Lena continued, pulling out more papers. "Building code violations that were ignored in the white neighborhoods but fast-tracked here. Selective enforcement. Mama documented it all." The screen door slammed, and Maya burst in, her braids bouncing. "Mom, Mr. Johnson said I could help paint the new shed." She stopped short, sensing the serious atmosphere. "Are you and Mr. Evan friends again?" Lena's expression softened as she looked at her daughter. "Baby, we're trying to do what Grandma Ruth wanted. Sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they should be simple." Outside, the work continued. The veterans had the shed's frame nearly complete, while the Quilting Guild members were hanging their restored pieces on a clothesline to air in the autumn breeze. The sight of the colorful quilts fluttering against the blue sky made Evan's throat tight with emotion. Clara returned from the courthouse, her face bright with victory. "The judge granted our injunction. The condemnation order is suspended pending a full hearing." A cheer went up from the workers in the yard. Mr. Johnson actually dropped his hammer, and Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. As the afternoon sun began to lower, Caleb and Maya dragged out boxes of paper lanterns that had survived the fire. They worked together, stringing them along the porch railings, while Evan and Lena stood watching. "Thank you," Evan said quietly, "for coming back, for believing in this." Lena was silent for a moment, watching Maya laugh as Caleb showed her how to hang the lanterns just right. "Mama always said a community is like a quilt," she finally responded. "Every piece matters, even the ones that don't seem to match at first." Above them, the paper lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, not yet lit but ready to glow when darkness fell. In the yard, the shed stood nearly complete, its new wood bright against the old. The quilts on the line caught the last rays of sun, their mended patches barely visible but making them somehow more beautiful for having been broken and restored. Maya called down from her perch on the porch rail, where Caleb was spotting her as she reached up to adjust a lantern. "Mom, Mr. Evan, look how pretty it's going to be when we light them up." Lena smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "It sure is, baby. It sure is." The lights burned late at Ruth's house, casting warm rectangles onto the front lawn. Inside the parlor, chairs had been arranged in a loose circle, and nervous energy filled the air like static before a storm. Evan sat in Ruth's old rocking chair, his worn notebook open on his lap, watching as one by one their small army of supporters practice what they would say at tomorrow's council hearing. Mrs. Chin from the Quilting Guild stood, smoothing her flowered dress. "I tell them about the winter coat drive," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "How we fixed 30 coats for children who needed them. This place, it gives people dignity." Clara nodded encouragingly from her perch on the window seat. Her legal pad was covered in neat notes, arrows, and underlining. "That's perfect, Mrs. Chen. Personal stories like that show the real impact." Lena sat cross-legged on the floor beside Maya, both of them leaning against the old sofa. She'd come straight from her hospital shift, still in her scrubs, but fatigue couldn't dim the determination in her eyes. "I'm going to read from Mama's ledger," she said, touching the worn book in her lap. "Show how Councilman Hale's urban renewal plan follows the same patterns as the old redlining maps." "Just stick to the facts," Clara advised. "Let the documents speak for themselves." Caleb slouched against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "I'm talking about the bike repair program," he said. "How kids from both sides of town work together now. How Tommy Jenkins and Deshaun Williams went from not speaking to being best friends." Pastor Lyle, sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, smiled. "The Spirit moves in mysterious ways," he said, "sometimes through bicycle chains and brake pads." Maya stood up suddenly, clutching Lullaby to her chest. The doll's crack was barely visible now, a thin line that caught the light. "My turn," she announced. Everyone fell quiet as Maya walked to the center of the circle. She looked tiny, but determined in her yellow dress, her braids tied with matching ribbons. Mr. Evan fixed Lullaby when she was broken, Maya began, her voice clear and strong for an 8-year-old. He didn't even know me or Grandma Ruth, but he stayed late to help because that's what good people do. Grandma always said when things break, you mend them twice, once with glue and once with love. That's what happens here every day. We fix stuff, but we also fix. She paused, searching for the right word. Hearts? Lena suggested softly. Maya nodded. Hearts, and neighborhoods, and families. Grandma Ruth would say, that's church happening right here on her porch. She hugged Lullaby closer. Please don't take away our fixing place. Clara wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. Maya, that's beautiful. Just like that tomorrow, okay? Evan found himself gripping his notebook too tightly, the edges crumpling under his fingers. The simple truth in Maya's words made his own carefully prepared statement feel inadequate. Pastor Lyle must have noticed his distress. He stood up, spreading his arms. Before we practice anymore, let's pray together. They formed a circle, holding hands, Evan between Clara and Caleb, Maya tucked against her mother's side, Mrs. Chin linking arms with the VFW representatives who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. Pastor Lyle's deep voice filled the room with warmth. Lord, we stand before you tonight as your children, seeking wisdom and courage. Guide our words tomorrow. Help us speak truth with love. Stand firm with grace. Bless this house and the dream of healing it represents. And Lord, we thank you for bringing us together, black and white, young and old, all your children working as one family to mend what's broken. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, they echoed softly. The group began to disperse after that, gathering coats and bags, exchanging hugs and words of encouragement. Clara lingered, helping Evan straighten the chairs. Get some sleep tonight, she told him, touching his arm gently. Tomorrow will take care of itself. But long after everyone had gone, after Caleb had headed home to finish his homework, Evan sat alone in Ruth's parlor. The only light came from a small lamp on the side table, casting just enough glow to see the scrapbook open in his lap. He traced his finger over a photograph he'd looked at 100 times now. His late wife Sarah in Ruth's choir, her face bright with joy as she sang. He'd never known they'd been friends. How many other connections had he missed over the years, too busy with his own grief to see the community around him? The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight. Evan turned another page, studying Ruth's careful handwriting in the margins, her newspaper clippings about neighborhood history, her photos of children growing up on these streets. Somewhere in these pages lay the courage he needed for tomorrow, not just to save the center, but to truly become the steward Ruth had believed he could be. The house creaked and settled around him, as if it too was gathering strength for the battle ahead. Through the window, he could see porch lights glowing up and down the street, small beacons of hope in the darkness, just as Ruth had intended. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Willowbend's council chamber, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Every seat was filled, with people standing 3 deep along the walls. The air felt thick with tension and the rustle of papers. Evan sat in the front row between Clara and Caleb, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The familiar faces of their supporters filled the rows behind them, the quilting guild members in their Sunday best, veterans wearing their service pins, church members who'd helped paint walls and move furniture. Councilman Hale sat at the raised platform with the other council members, looking down at them with practiced neutrality. His perfectly pressed suit and carefully arranged papers projected authority and control. Judge Martha Wilson, a silver-haired woman with wire-rimmed glasses, called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. We're here today regarding the matter of the Ruth Brooks estate and the proposed community center, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the packed chamber. Who speaks first? Clara stood, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Your Honor, we'd like to begin with Maya Brooks, Miss Ruth's granddaughter. Maya walked to the podium, clutching Lullaby carefully against her chest. She looked tiny standing there, but her voice rang out clear and strong. My Grandma Ruth always said that broken things deserve a second chance. She began, lifting her doll slightly. When Lullaby broke, I was so sad, but Mr. Evan fixed her, not just with glue, but with love, just like Grandma taught me. The room grew perfectly still as Maya continued. Mr. Evan fixes people's things for free when they can't pay. He taught Jimmy from my class how to fix his bike, and Mrs. Chin how to make her sewing machine work again. She paused, looking directly at the council members. Grandma said that's what church really means. Helping people. That's what we do at the center. As Maya returned to her seat, Mrs. Chen stood up, followed by Mr. Rodriguez from the Veterans Club. One by one, they shared their stories of repaired family heirlooms, of teens learning trade skills, of lonely seniors finding purpose in community. Frank Wilson, a Korean War veteran with weathered hands, spoke about teaching young men to repair engines. These kids need something real to hold on to, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. They need to know somebody believes in them. That's what Ruth's place gives them. Clara rose again, her expression composed but determined. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding Councilman Hale's involvement in this matter. She gestured to an aide who began distributing packets of paper. These are emails recovered from Ruth Brooks' records, showing a pattern of discriminatory planning and attempted property acquisition. Hale's practiced smile faltered as the document circulated. The emails detailed his plans to convert the historic black neighborhood into luxury condominiums, complete with discussions about pricing out current residents. Furthermore, Clara continued, we have Ruth Brooks' original audio testament. She held up the cassette tape found in Lullaby's music box. With the court's permission, I'd like to play this recording. Judge Wilson nodded, and Ruth's warm, strong voice filled the chamber. I leave my home and legacy fund to the mender with gentle hands, she said clearly. Let love steward my house. Let it be a place where all God's children can gather, where broken things and broken spirits find healing. Hale stood up, straightening his tie. Your Honor, regardless of sentiment, there are serious safety concerns. Actually, Clara interrupted smoothly, we have certified inspections from 3 independent firms, confirming the property meets all current codes. She produced another stack of documents. The only violations cited were those issued after Councilman Hale's office intervened with the housing department. The morning wore on as more community members spoke. Pastor Lyle testified about the center's impact on church youth programs. The Quilting Guild presented a petition with hundreds of signatures. Even Mrs. Thompson, who'd initially opposed the center, stood to describe how it had helped her grandson stay out of trouble. Throughout it all, Judge Wilson listened intently, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp and attentive. Finally, as the lunch hour approached, she tapped her gavel again. I've heard enough testimony for now, she announced. This court will take a 1-hour recess before delivering its decision. She gathered her papers and stood. Chamber is in recess. The crowd began to stir, their whispered conversations filling the air with a nervous buzz. Evan remained seated, watching as Hale conferred urgently with his lawyers in the corner. Maya slipped her small hand into his and squeezed it gently. Grandma always said truth wins in the end, she whispered. Clara touched his shoulder. We've done everything we can, she said quietly. Now we wait. The chamber slowly emptied as people filed out for lunch, but the tension in the air remained, thick and heavy with possibility. The council chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as people filed back in after recess. Evan's shirt collar felt tight against his neck as he straightened in his wooden chair. Clara's hand found his and squeezed gently. Judge Martha Wilson, her gray hair neatly pinned back, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. The room fell silent. She looked directly at Evan, then swept her gaze across the packed chamber. After careful consideration of the evidence presented today, including Mrs. Ruth Brooks' audio testament and the documented history of her property, this court finds in favor of Mr. Evan Cole and upholds the conditions of the will in their entirety. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Maya, sitting with her mother in the row behind Evan, hugged Lullaby tighter to her chest. Furthermore, Judge Wilson continued, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, all permits previously suspended are hereby restored, effective immediately. The emergency condemnation notice is rescinded, as it was filed without proper cause or evidence. The judge turned her attention to Councilman Hale, who sat stiffly in his chair, his usual polished smile nowhere to be seen. Regarding the conduct of Councilman Trent Hale, this court finds sufficient evidence of ethical violations in his handling of the Brooks property matter. The council will vote on an official censure, and all development proposals related to the property are suspended pending review. Hale's face reddened, but he remained silent, staring straight ahead. Mr. Cole. The judge's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Brooks chose wisely when she selected you as steward of her legacy. This court expects you to honor that trust. Yes, Your Honor, Evan managed, his voice rough with emotion. I will. Then this hearing is adjourned. The sharp crack of her gavel echoed through the chamber. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Caleb wrapped his father in a fierce hug, and Clara wiped tears from her eyes. Maya bounced up and down, her braids flying, while Lena smiled broader than Evan had ever seen. Pastor Lyle made his way through the crowd, beaming. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he said, clasping Evan's hand, though sometimes his path is clearer than we think. Mrs. Johnson from the Quilting Guild pressed forward to hug Evan. We're making you a special quilt for the center, she declared. Something to show both sides of town coming together. Even some of the people who doubted him came forward. Mr. Harrison, who'd pulled his grandkids from Caleb's bike repair classes, approached with his hand extended. I was wrong about you, he said gruffly. My boys missed those classes. Think they could come back? Anytime, Evan replied, shaking his hand firmly. The door's always open. Clara stood beside him, her legal papers already tucked neatly in her briefcase. Ruth would be proud, she said softly, not just of saving the sinner, but of how you did it, with dignity and grace. We all did it, Evan corrected her, looking around at the faces of his neighbors. Every single person here. The veterans who'd helped rebuild the shed clustered around him, trading handshakes and backslaps. Mrs. Chen from the tea shop promised to bring her special oolong blend for Lena's tea corner. The choir director mentioned starting weekly practices again. Near the back of the room, Evan spotted Councilman Hale slipping toward the door. Their eyes met briefly. Hale gave a short, tight nod, not quite acceptance, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement, before disappearing into the hallway. Lena touched Evan's arm. Mama always said a house needs more than walls to make it a home. It needs heart. You gave her house that. Your mama gave me a chance, Evan replied. I just tried not to waste it. The crowd gradually thinned as people headed back to their daily lives. Evan gathered his papers, tucking Ruth's photo, the one he'd brought to show the judge, carefully into his jacket pocket. Clara offered to handle the final paperwork, her eyes twinkling when she suggested they could discuss it over dinner sometime. Finally, Evan pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped outside. The afternoon sun hit him full in the face, warm and bright. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift from his shoulders. The air smelled like spring, like possibility, like hope. He was free to build something meaningful, free to honor Ruth's legacy, free to be the man she'd somehow known he could be, the man who mended things twice, with both skill and heart, a father, a neighbor, a steward of something larger than himself. Looking up at the clear blue sky, Evan took a deep breath of the fresh afternoon air. Behind him, the council chamber doors opened again as others emerged into the sunlight. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ruth's front lawn as volunteers arrived with paint cans, toolboxes, and determined smiles. 1 week had passed since the judge's ruling, and the community had rallied to restore the property to its former glory, and then some. Evan stood on the creaky porch, coffee mug in hand, watching Caleb unload spray paint cans from his backpack. His son had spent days sketching designs for the carriage house wall, blending elements of Willowbin's past and present into something new. You sure about those colors? Evan called out, eyeing the vibrant blues and greens. Caleb grinned, arranging the cans in neat rows. Trust me, Dad. Ruth's place needs some life breathed back into it. Clara's sedan pulled up, choir folders tucked under her arm as she stepped out. Her silver hair caught the morning light, and Evan found himself smiling at the sight. She'd been organizing rehearsals all week, determined to fill the house with music again. Morning, you two, she called out, climbing the porch steps. The sopranos are coming at 10, and I've got the tenors lined up for after lunch. Inside, Lena was already setting up her tea corner in what used to be Ruth's sitting room. She'd brought her mother's old teapot, the one with hand-painted roses, and arranged mismatched vintage cups on a restored cabinet. The morning light streamed through freshly washed windows, making the copper kettle gleam. Maya helped me pick out the tea blends, Lena said, measuring loose leaves into labeled jars. She says every good story needs the right cup of tea to go with it. Evan nodded, touching the worn banister. I better get started on this porch railing. Some of these posts are loose. He retrieved his toolbox from his truck, the familiar weight comforting in his hands. This was something he understood. The grain of wood, the quiet satisfaction of making broken things whole again. As he worked, the sound of Caleb's spray paint hissed in the background, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from the growing crowd of volunteers. The morning wore on. Clara's choir members arrived in waves, their voices drifting through open windows as they practiced hymns Ruth had loved. The harmony of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" floated out across the lawn, making several workers pause to listen. Evan worked steadily, removing rotted sections of railing and replacing them with carefully measured new pieces. He'd chosen oak, solid and dependable, knowing it would last for years to come. Each post he set felt like planting a small flag of permanence. Around noon, Maya appeared with sandwiches her mother had made. She sat on the porch steps, watching Caleb work on his mural. The design was taking shape, faces emerging from swirls of color, hands reaching out to help, tools and musical notes weaving through it all. "Look, Mr. Evan," she said, pointing to a particular figure in the mural. "That's Grandma Ruth, right there in the middle. She's holding Lullaby." Evan paused his work to look. Sure enough, there was Ruth's familiar silhouette, the doll cradled in her arms, surrounded by the community she'd loved. Caleb had captured her essence somehow, making her presence feel both memorial and alive. The afternoon brought more helpers. Veterans from the VFW showed up with lumber for the shed repairs. The Quilting Guild ladies arrived with fresh baked goods and sharp eyes for detail, pointing out spots that needed touching up. Every hour, someone new appeared with tools or supplies or simply willing hands. Lena kept her tea corner busy, serving cups of Ruth's favorite blend to tired workers. The china cups clinked gently as people gathered to rest and talk, sharing stories about Ruth and their hopes for the center's future. The room hummed with conversation and the sweet smell of bergamot. Clara took breaks from choir practice to sit with Evan as he worked, handing him nails or holding boards steady. Their hands brushed occasionally, and neither pulled away too quickly. They worked in comfortable silence, understanding growing between them like a quiet stream. As the day waned, Caleb finished his mural. The entire community had been woven into the design: the choir, the repair shop, children on bikes, elders sharing wisdom. At the center, Ruth's porch light glowed, a beacon drawing everyone together. "What do you think?" Caleb asked, wiping paint from his hands. "It's perfect," Evan said, his voice rough with emotion. "She would have loved it." The sun began to set as Evan secured the last section of porch railing. He tested each post, making sure everything was solid. Clara and Lena hung paper lanterns from the new brackets he'd installed, their soft light beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Around them, volunteers were cleaning up, gathering tools, and stepping back to admire their work. The restored porch gleamed with fresh paint, its new railings sturdy and welcoming. Lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting warm pools of light across the boards where so many conversations would take place. The day's last choir rehearsal ended, and the singers spilled out onto the porch, their voices still humming with harmony. They mingled with the remaining workers, admiring the mural and the repairs, everyone speaking in the soft tones that come with shared accomplishment. Evan stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the house that had become so much more than a building. The lanterns glowed like earthbound stars, illuminating the fresh paint and new wood, the careful repairs and loving touches that had transformed Ruth's home into everyone's home. The Saturday morning air buzzed with anticipation as nearly 200 people gathered on the freshly mowed lawn. A large cloth covered the new sign mounted above the wraparound porch, fluttering gently in the breeze. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter mixing with the murmur of conversation. Evan adjusted his tie, the same one he'd worn to his wife's funeral, but today it felt different, less heavy. Beside him, Maya bounced on her toes, clutching Lullaby to her chest. The porcelain doll's crack was still visible, a gentle reminder of where this journey had begun. "Almost time," Clara whispered, touching his elbow. She wore a blue dress that matched the morning sky, her choir director's folder tucked neatly under her arm. The choir members stood ready on the porch steps, their matching robes crisp and clean. Lena emerged from inside, carrying a tray of Ruth's favorite teacups. "Everything's set up in there," she said. The display tables looked beautiful. Through the open windows, Evan could see the careful arrangements: repaired radios, restored furniture, mended quilts, and dozens of other items that told the story of their community coming together. Each piece carried a small card explaining its history and who had fixed it. Caleb's mural on the carriage house wall drew many admiring glances. It showed hands of different colors, passing tools and fragments of broken things to each other, all flowing together into the shape of a house with an open door. Above it, in flowing script, "Mended twice." Pastor Lyle stepped forward, raising his hands for quiet. The crowd settled, and Evan's heart quickened. This was the moment, not just unveiling a sign, but declaring what they'd become. "Friends," the pastor began, "we gather today to celebrate something remarkable. Not just the saving of a house, but the mending of a community." He nodded to Evan. "Mr. Cole, would you do the honors?" Evan gripped the rope attached to the cloth cover, looking out at the faces before him. There were the Quilting Guild ladies who'd worked late into nights, repairing fire-damaged heirlooms. The veterans who'd rebuilt the shed, stronger than before. Young bike mechanics Caleb had trained. Children clutching toys that now worked again. With a steady pull, he revealed the new sign. "Ruth's Porch, a house for mending." The letters were hand-carved by Mr. Chin, the retired woodworker who'd found purpose again, teaching workshops in the basement. Applause rippled through the crowd. Maya squeezed Evan's hand, beaming up at him. "Grandma would love it," she whispered. Clara raised her conductor's hands, and the choir began to sing "Amazing Grace." Their voices filled the morning air, floating across the neighborhood where Ruth had lived and loved for so many years. Several elderly residents wiped away tears, remembering countless evenings of Ruth's choir practices drifting through these same streets. When the song ended, Evan stepped to the microphone they'd set up. He pulled a wrinkled note from his pocket, then tucked it away again. These words needed to come from his heart. "A few months ago," he began, his voice steady, "a little girl brought me a broken doll. She told me something her grandmother always said. When things break, you mend them twice, once with glue, once with love." He paused, looking at the gathered faces. I didn't understand then what Ruth Brooks already knew, that sometimes the strongest repairs aren't the ones you can see. He gestured to the house behind him. "This place isn't just about fixing broken objects. It's about mending the tears in our community fabric. Every time someone walks through that door seeking help, they'll find more than just tools and willing hands. They'll find neighbors who care, stories to share, and maybe even a cup of tea." Children played tag around the newly planted flower beds while he spoke. A toddler balanced on her father's shoulders, pointing at the wind chimes Caleb had repaired and hung from the porch rafters. These simple moments were exactly what Ruth had envisioned. "So today," Evan continued, "we're not just opening a repair shop or a community center. We're creating a place where everyone belongs, where every broken thing and person has value, where we remember that the strongest communities are built by mending things twice." Clara stepped forward then, distributing song sheets through the crowd. The choir spread out, mixing with the audience as they began to sing "Lean on Me." Voices joined in, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Even those who didn't know the words hummed along. The harmony swelled, filling the street with music. Evan watched as former skeptics sang beside early supporters. Children swayed with grandparents, and neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now shared smiles over shared lyrics. Maya tugged at his sleeve, pointing to Lullaby. "Look, Mr. Evan, she's dancing." The little girl made the doll sway in time with the music, its crack catching the morning light like a badge of honor. The song rose and fell, voices weaving together like threads in one of Ruth's quilts. This was what she'd seen possible, not just a building preserved, but a community restored, every voice adding its own unique thread to the tapestry of their town's story. Standing there on Ruth's porch, now everyone's porch, Evan felt the truth of it all. Sometimes the strongest things were those that had been broken and mended, not once, but twice. Once with skill, and once with love. Inside the restored parlor of Ruth's house, sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, casting warm patterns across the polished hardwood floor. The room buzzed with quiet excitement as members of the Quilting Guild carefully unfolded their masterpiece. Mrs. Henderson, the Guild's eldest member at 84, directed the operation with practiced authority. "Careful now with that corner, Betty," she called out. "We've put too many hours into this beauty to snag it at the finish line." The massive quilt stretched nearly wall to wall as they laid it out on display stands. Each carefully stitched square told a story, names both familiar and forgotten, woven into a tapestry of community history. The intricate patterns flowed from one section to the next. Traditional African-American designs merged seamlessly with European-inspired motifs, creating something entirely new and uniquely Willowbend. Clara stepped forward, running her fingers lightly over the delicate stitching. "It's absolutely beautiful," she whispered, Look at how the patterns connect, like they were always meant to be together. Evan noticed how the surnames crossed traditional boundaries. Johnson next to O'Malley, Washington beside Schmidt, Lee intertwined with Rodriguez. The guild had arranged the names not by neighborhood or heritage, but by the years each family had lived in Willowbend, creating a timeline of arrival that showed how the community had grown together. Maya pressed close to her mother's side, pointing excitedly. "Look, Mama, there's Grandma Ruth's name!" The Brooks family square featured a small porcelain doll design, clearly inspired by Lullaby, who now sat proudly restored in a place of honor on the mantel. Mrs. Henderson gestured for Lena and Maya to come forward. "We saved this for today," she said, holding up a smaller, framed piece of the quilt. "This was the first square we completed, the pattern Ruth herself chose before she passed." The square showed a porch light glowing in darkness, with the Brooks family name embroidered in golden thread. Small beads had been sewn in to catch the light, making the design seem to shimmer. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. Ruth wanted everyone to remember that her porch light was always on. Henderson explained, her voice warm with memory. "Said you could judge a neighborhood by how many porch lights stayed lit after dark." Evan stepped forward, clearing his throat. "This square and the whole quilt will hang permanently in the parlor," he announced, "right where Ruth used to host her famous Sunday teas." He glanced at Lena, seeking approval. "It's part of our history now, all of our history." The Quilting Guild members began pointing out details to the gathering crowd. There was the tiny crossed wrench pattern in the Cole family square, representing Evan's repair shop. The Wind Square featured musical notes, a nod to Clara's years directing the choir. Each design had been chosen with careful thought, weaving together the town's past and present. "My great-grandmother's name is here," one elderly man remarked, his finger tracing the faded surname. "She worked as a housekeeper in this very home, back when it was first built." "And here's my daddy's family," added another voice. "He helped install the first streetlights on this block." The room filled with similar discoveries as people found their connections to each other through the quilt's intricate design. Children traced the patterns with curious fingers, while their parents and grandparents shared stories, filling the air with the soft murmur of remembered history. Maya tugged at Evan's sleeve. "Mr. Evan, can I show everyone how to do the special stitch Grandma taught me? The one for mending?" "Of course you can, sweetheart," Evan smiled. "That's what this place is for, passing on what we know." Several of the guild members gathered around as Maya demonstrated the careful stitch she'd learned at Ruth's knee. Her small fingers moved with surprising confidence, showing how the thread could bring torn edges together so neatly the repair was almost invisible. "See?" she explained. The evening air held the last warmth of a late summer day as Evan and Clara stepped out under Ruth's front porch. Above them, crickets had started their nightly chorus, and the first fireflies blinked in the deepening twilight. "Ready for the ceremonial lighting?" Clara asked, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. She wore a simple blue cardigan against the cooling air, her silver hair catching the last golden rays of sunset. Evan nodded, fishing in his pocket for the brass key to Ruth's house. "It feels right, doesn't it, starting from here?" They descended the porch steps together, their footsteps in sync on the newly repaired boards. Evan paused at the bottom to switch on Ruth's porch light, the same one she'd kept burning every night for decades, welcoming any neighbor in need of comfort or conversation. The warm yellow glow spilled down the front steps, casting long shadows across the fresh paint. Clara reached for Evan's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "One light at a time," she said softly. They started down the sidewalk together, where Maya was already bouncing ahead with the boundless energy of childhood. Her pigtails swung as she skipped, Lullaby clutched securely in one arm. "Miss Clara, Mr. Evan, can I ring Mrs. Johnson's doorbell?" Maya called back, practically vibrating with excitement. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Clara answered, chuckling. "But remember what we practiced, polite and patient." They watched as Maya pressed the bell, stepping back respectfully as Mrs. Johnson, a retired schoolteacher, opened her door. The little girl's voice carried clearly in the evening quiet. "We're turning on all the porch lights tonight, like Grandma Ruth used to do. Will you join us?" Mrs. Johnson's weathered face creased in a smile. "Why, of course." She reached just inside her door to flip the switch, and another pool of light joined Ruth's. "I remember your grandmother doing this on special occasions. She always said a lit porch was like an open heart." Caleb trailed behind them, his camera clicking steadily as he documented the growing constellation of lights. He'd inherited his mother's eye for capturing meaningful moments. Evan thought with a bittersweet pang of pride. "Dad," Caleb called out, lowering his camera. "Look, the Washingtons are coming out too." Sure enough, 3 houses down, James Washington and his wife were emerging onto their porch. James raised a hand in greeting, then reached back to switch on their light. Their teenage daughters appeared a moment later, curious about the growing procession. "Mind if we join you?" James called out. "The more the merrier," Clara responded warmly. House by house, the ceremony spread like a gentle wave. Some residents were already waiting on their porches, having spotted the growing group from their windows. Others answered Maya's cheerful summons, unable to resist her earnest invitation and the infectious spirit of community that followed in her wake. Mrs. Chen brought out a plate of still warm almond cookies. The Rodriguez family's youngest children darted between adults, playing an impromptu game of tag in the pools of light. Even old Mr. Peters, known for his gruff demeanor, shuffled out to participate, his weather-beaten face softening as Maya solemnly explained the purpose of their evening walk. Evan felt a familiar ache in his chest, not the sharp pain of grief he'd carried for so long, but something warmer, fuller. He watched as Caleb showed Maya how to frame a shot with his camera, the two of them laughing together as they captured the growing glow of the neighborhood. "You're quiet," Clara observed, her shoulder brushing his as they walked. "Just taking it in," Evan replied. "You know, when Ruth first named me in that will, I thought she was asking me to fix up a building. But that wasn't it at all, was it?" Clara shook her head, her eyes scanning the illuminated porches. She knew what she was doing. Sometimes the things that need mending aren't made of wood or metal. They passed the spot where the carriage shed had burned, now rebuilt stronger than before. The mural Caleb had painted on its side seemed to come alive in the gathering dusk, faces and hands of all colors, intertwined with gears and tools, musical notes and flowers, telling the story of their community in vibrant colors. More neighbors joined their procession. Lena caught up with them, still wearing her nurse's scrubs from her shift at the hospital. She fell into step beside them, watching Maya with soft eyes as her daughter led the way like a tiny herald of hope. "Mama would love this," Lena said quietly. She always said porches were the soul of a neighborhood, not just the lights, but what they meant. That someone was home, awake, ready to help if needed. The street was transforming with each new light. Shadows retreated as warm circles of illumination overlapped, creating a continuous pathway of welcome. Some neighbors had brought out chairs, settling in to enjoy the impromptu gathering. The sounds of conversation and laughter mingled with the evening bird's last song. "Mr. Evan," Maya called out, running back to tug at his sleeve. "Come see, you can see all the lights from the top of the hill." Hand in hand with Clara, Evan followed Maya to the crest of Cedar Street. From there, they could indeed see the entire neighborhood spread out below them. What had started as a single light at Ruth's house had become a tapestry of warmth, each porch a beacon in the growing darkness. Caleb joined them, his camera hanging around his neck. "Pretty amazing, Dad," he said, nudging Evan's shoulder. The gesture reminded Evan so much of his late wife that his breath caught for a moment. But this time, the memory brought more comfort than pain. Ruth had known, somehow she had known that the act of mending went far beyond fixing broken things. It was about creating spaces where people could come together, where the light of welcome never went out. Maya stood on tiptoe, still holding Lullaby, her face glowing with joy as she surveyed their handiwork. "Look, even Mr. Hale's house has its light on." Sure enough, at the far end of the street, the former councilman's porch light shone along with all the others. Redemption, Evan thought, could come in many forms. The evening air had grown cooler, but Evan barely noticed. Standing there with Clara's hand in his, watching Caleb show Maya how to use the camera's night settings, surrounded by the warm glow of dozens of porch lights and the sound of neighbors talking and laughing together, he felt something settle in his soul. This was what belonging felt like, not just to a place, but to a community, to a story larger than himself. Maya stood on tiptoes in Ruth's parlor, her small hands carefully positioning Lullaby on the polished oak shelf beneath her grandmother's portrait. The late afternoon sun streamed through the freshly washed windows, casting warm squares of light across the hardwood floors. The doll's porcelain face caught the sunlight, making her painted features glow. "Is this the right spot, Mr. Evan?" Maya asked, stepping back to examine her work. She tilted her head, studying how Lullaby sat beneath Ruth's smiling photograph. Evan moved closer, his work boots quiet on the restored floorboards. He knelt beside Maya, bringing himself to her eye level. Through the windows, the sounds of choir members arriving for practice drifted in, car doors closing, friendly greetings, and gentle laughter. "That's perfect," he said, gesturing to where the crack in Lullaby's torso was visible. "You know, some people might try to hide that crack, but I think it should stay just like this." Maya's brow furrowed. "But won't people think she's broken?" "No, sweetheart." Evan smiled, touching the faint line where he'd mended the doll. "This crack tells a story. It's like your grandma always said, things need mending twice. Once with glue, and once with love," Maya finished, beaming. She reached out to straighten Lullaby's dress, her small fingers gentle against the fabric. Across the room, Caleb balanced on a stepladder, carefully hanging the final piece of his mural. The painting wrapped around the parlor walls, a vibrant tapestry of Willowbend's history. Children playing jump rope merged into seniors sharing stories on porches, which flowed into scenes of community dinners and choir performances. "Hey, Dad," Caleb called down. "Can you check if this section's level?" Evan walked over, squinting up at the piece. It showed Ruth's house with its porch light glowing, surrounded by neighbors of all ages. "Looks perfect, son. That light you painted? It's exactly how I remember it." "That's because you made me redo it 3 times," Caleb grinned, climbing down. He wiped his hands on his paint-spotted jeans and stood back to admire his work. "Think Grandma Ruth would have liked it?" "She would have loved it," Lena said, entering with a tray of steaming teacups. The delicate china clinked softly as she set it on the coffee table. "My mama always said art should tell the truth, and this tells our truth." Clara followed with a fresh apple pie, its crust golden brown and still warm from the oven. The sweet, cinnamon scent filled the room, mixing with the Earl Grey tea Lena had brewed. Outside, the choir began their warm-ups, their harmonies floating through the open windows. "Maya, honey, would you help me set out the plates?" Lena asked, pulling out Ruth's old china from the cabinet. Maya skipped over, carefully carrying each plate to the coffee table. She arranged them in a perfect circle, just as she'd watched her grandmother do countless times before. Evan sat in Ruth's old armchair, its fabric freshly cleaned but still bearing the comfortable wear of years of use. He watched as Caleb added a few final touches to the mural's edges, as Maya counted out forks with serious concentration, as Clara and Lena worked together to serve the pie. Through the window, he could see Pastor Lyle leading the choir through their scales. The music swelled and ebbed, a familiar hymn taking shape. Some of the singers swayed gently, their voices blending in practiced harmony. "Tea's ready," Clara announced, passing out the cups. Steam curled up from the dark liquid, carrying the bergamot scent that had always been Ruth's favorite. They gathered around the coffee table, balancing plates on their laps. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, her pie already half-eaten, while Caleb sprawled in the window seat, his long legs stretched out before him. "You know," Lena said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "Mama would sit right where you are now, Evan, and tell stories while we had our afternoon tea. She'd say every cup shared was a bridge built." The choir's voices rose in perfect harmony, singing about grace and redemption. The music seemed to wrap around them like a warm blanket, familiar and comforting. Maya got up and walked back to Lullaby's shelf, pie crumbs on her chin. "Grandma used to sing this one to me in Lullaby," she said, reaching up to touch the doll's hand. "Remember, Mama? She'd rock in her chair and sing until we fell asleep." Lena nodded, her eyes growing soft with memory. "That she did, baby. That she did." The late afternoon light began to shift, painting the walls in soft gold. It caught the edges of Caleb's mural, making the painted porch light seem to actually glow. The choir moved into another song, this one slower and sweeter. They sat together, sharing pie and memories, while the music wove through the air. Maya hummed along between bites, Caleb tapped his foot to the rhythm, and Clara poured second cups of tea. The crack in Lullaby's torso caught the light, a gentle reminder of what it meant to be broken and made whole again. The late September evening wrapped Willowbend in a gentle coolness as Evan Cole made his final rounds through Ruth's house. No, he corrected himself. Through the community center. The floors still held the warmth of a day filled with activity. Morning quilting circles, afternoon bike repairs with Caleb's kids, and tonight's potluck supper that had drawn folks from both sides of Main Street. He paused in the parlor, where Lullaby sat proudly on her shelf beneath Ruth's portrait. The doll's familiar crack caught the lamplight, a testament to breaks mended and hearts healed. Next to it hung the community quilt, its patches telling stories of families across generations. Surnames stitched together just as their bearers now gathered under this roof. Just like you planned, didn't you? Evan murmured to Ruth's photograph, switching off the parlor lamps. The room fell into shadow, save for the glow of porch lights filtering through the windows. In the kitchen, he found a forgotten plate of Mrs. Henderson's chocolate chip cookies, the ones she'd started bringing every Thursday after Caleb fixed her grandson's bicycle. He wrapped them carefully in wax paper, making a mental note to return the plate tomorrow. These small gestures of borrowing and returning, of sharing and mending, had become the center's heartbeat. The choir room still hummed with leftover music, even hours after practice had ended. Sheet music lay sorted on the piano, Clara's neat handwriting marking upcoming hymns for Sunday. Her reading glasses sat folded beside them, forgotten in her hurry to help serve at the potluck. Evan pocketed them with a smile, knowing she'd need them for tomorrow's legal briefs. Moving through the wide hallway, he straightened a frame holding Caleb's latest photographs, faces of their neighbors caught in moments of joy, learning, and connection. There was Maya teaching younger kids how to thread a needle, veterans showing teens how to fold flags, Clara directing the choir with her whole heart visible in her stance. The wooden floors creaked familiar greetings under his boots as he made his way to the front door. Each sound reminded him of late nights spent replacing boards, of Clara bringing him coffee, of Lena insisting he take breaks to share tea and stories. The house had taught him its language over these months, speaking in settling beams and whistling radiators. At the entrance, he paused to check the donation box. Fuller than yesterday, with carefully counted dollars and coins from folks who could spare them, helping to keep the lights on for those who couldn't. The system worked because everyone gave what they could, whether money, time, or skills. Even Hale had started sending his grandchildren for art classes, though he'd never admit to the change of heart. Evan pulled out his keys, the familiar weight of them in his palm, a reminder of Ruth's trust. The porch light cast his shadow long across the wooden boards as he stepped outside. The evening air carried the last notes of someone practicing piano inside the Methodist church down the street, mixed with the sound of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. He turned to lock up, the brass key sliding home with a solid click. The sound always reminded him of that first key found in Lullaby's hidden compartment, how such a small thing had unlocked so much more than just a safety deposit box. Behind him, voices and laughter made him pause. He turned to find the porch steps still occupied, though the potluck had ended an hour ago. Mrs. Chen from the Quilting Guild sat sharing her secret dumpling recipe with Pastor Lyle's wife. 2 doors down, more porch lights clicked on, then 3 more across the street, like stars appearing in the early evening sky. The Henderson kids were teaching Maya to play double dutch under the streetlight, their jump rope making soft wishing sounds against the pavement. Their mother called out a warning about 5 more minutes, but her smile was visible even in the growing dusk. On the bottom step, Mr. Washington and Tom Carter, who'd barely spoken to each other 3 months ago, were deep in conversation about vintage car restoration, their heads bent over Tom's phone as he showed off photos of his latest project. The VFW crew had scheduled their next meeting here instead of their usual hall, and someone had mentioned starting a community garden in the spring. Soft footsteps approached from his left, and then Clara was beside him, her presence as natural as breathing. She'd lost the formal suit jacket from earlier, and her gray hair caught the porch light like silver. Without a word, she slipped her hand into his, their fingers finding their familiar fit. The brass band from 2 streets over started up their evening practice, the music floating between the houses like a blessing. Someone had once told Evan that sound carried better in the evening air, and he believed it now as the notes seemed to dance with the fireflies just beginning to emerge. "Would you look at that?" Clara murmured, nodding toward where Lena was showing a group of teenagers how to wrap sweet potato pies in brown paper, the way her mother had taught her. The kids were actually listening, phones forgotten in their pockets. More porch lights winked on down the street, creating a pathway of warm welcome through the neighborhood. Each light represented a home, a family, a story, all of them now interconnected through this place Ruth had dreamed into being. The choir's hymns from earlier seemed to linger in the air, harmony building between houses that had once stood apart. Evan looked at their joined hands, then at the people scattered across the porch and yard, sharing recipes and phone numbers, swapping stories and laughter. The crack in their community, like the one in Lullaby, hadn't disappeared, but it had been mended with something stronger than before. "Mended twice," he whispered, feeling Clara's hand squeeze his in understanding. Together, they started down the steps, nodding goodnight to their neighbors as the evening settled soft and sweet around them. The walk home beckoned, but like everyone else, they took their time, letting the moment stretch like honey in summer sun. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Evan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.